Turkish government says it's launched a comprehensive plan to address the so-called Kurdish question. Kurds, for their part, say they have their own roadmap to settle the issue. A chance for real peace. How far will it go, and what will it take for the Turkish government and the PKK to reconcile after decades of armed conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mariam Namazi. Could Kurdish fighters in Turkey be about to end 3 decades of violence? The Kurdistan Workers' Party, better known as the PKK, has been calling for an independent state since the 1970s. They've been labelled a terrorist organisation by the US and the European Union. Now their imprisoned founder, Abdullah Ocalan, says he'll release a roadmap for laying down arms and making peace with Turkey. His 4-point plan is expected to include a description of why Turkey in particular should solve the Kurdish issue. It'll suggest that Turkey establish alliances with the Kurds in Iraq and Syria. It should outline the steps necessary for both short and long-term solutions. And crucially, it's expected to give the conditions that must be met before PKK fighters will disarm. Well, last week, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan met with pro-Kurdish politicians. In the past, Erdogan declined requests for similar meetings because these politicians disagreed with the government's labelling of the PKK as a terrorist organisation. But now Erdogan seems positive in resolving the differences. After the meeting, he said, "Our people want unity, solidarity, cooperation, not death and blood. Mothers want the tears to stop. We all want this." Well, joining us now are our guests. In Ankara, Ibrahim Kalin, Chief Advisor to the Turkish Prime Minister. In Istanbul, Alan Collinsworth, an analyst on Turkish affairs and founder of the Farah Group, which consults Western companies operating in Turkey. And in London, Ibrahim Dogus, he's chairman of North London's Kurdish and Turkish Community Centre. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Ibrahim Kalin, if I can come to you first, what is the significance of these talks?
Well, they are extremely significant to find a final solution to the Kurdish issue that's been going on in Turkey for the last 3 decades or so. Obviously, the Kurdish issue itself goes much earlier, probably to the beginning of the Republic, modern Republic in the 1920s, but the PKK problem has been on our agenda since at least early 1980s. And there have been many other attempts in the past, starting with the time of Turgut Özal and Demirel and others who tried to find a solution to the Kurdish issue and disarm PKK and end PKK terrorism in Turkey, but most of them have failed for various reasons. But this time, all the elements seem to be in place to find a final solution to the Kurdish issue in Turkey.
Ibrahim Dogus, if we could just look at what the package could potentially include. There have been reports that the government plans to allow Kurdish to be used more freely by removing restrictions on the hours of Kurdish broadcasts and cancelling a law that bans the use of Kurdish in prisons. Are these positive steps, in your opinion?
Yes, these are indeed very positive steps, but the implementation of any such steps is still a difficulty in Turkey. A policy decision taken by the state, by the government itself, or the parliament in Turkey is not really, it might not really be implemented on the ground due to the status quo of the bureaucracy and the local sort of administrators.
Alan Collinsworth, do you agree with that, that certainly there seem to be some good intentions there, but the actual execution, the implementation of these plans could be somewhat difficult?
I think that's always the case. This is a very difficult region of the world, and Turkey has a very complicated political issues to deal with, particularly involving the Kurdish issue, where you have an opposition group as well as nationalist groups who are opportunizing on this particular situation for political gain.
Ibrahim Kalin, speaking about the different groups that have been voicing their opinions on the process that we're seeing, opposition parties have been drawing their own red lines. One opposition leader, chairman of the Republican People's Party, or CHP, Deniz Baykal, said regional autonomy in the Kurdish language in schools would be unacceptable to him. How likely is it that the Kurds will get what they want out of this process?
Well, I mean, the opposition coming from the two main opposition parties, MHP, the Nationalist Party, and the CHP, the People's Republican Party, is kind of predictable. It was expected. And I think they just reacted too early to whatever the government is going to come up with. First of all, the government has not announced its plan or action package yet, but we know from the sources that have made it kind of public that there will be two kind of sets of issues or elements within those packages or stages or steps that they will be taking. First is the disarmament of the PKK. That's a must, obviously, before anything can be done, because as long as you have fighting between the Turkish army and the Kurdish fighters, there will be no kind of suitable ground for any concrete action. And secondly, there will be a package of democratization, as the Interior Minister, Bashir Atalay, called it. A democratization process will be put in place. And it looks like it will contain elements about the Kurdish language, removing most of the obstacles before the usage of the Kurdish language in schools, in public, in political arena, etc. But besides the opposition of the main political parties in Turkey, that is the two of them, there is widespread support for the Kurdish initiative. And what is different this time, I think, about this entire initiative is that...
I just wanted to put one of the points you made to Mr. Dogus, that key point that the government is expected to ask the PKK to lay down their arms to disarm. Is that something the PKK would ever consider?
I mean, if that is a question to me, I guess they are considering this since a while, because the PKK and its leadership have been making statements for since last 7-8 years, I would say, especially after their leader Ocalan was arrested. They have been making statements. They have been making it very clear that for a peaceful reconciliation to Kurdish question, if the Turkish state acts bravely enough and grants basic rights to Kurdish people, then at that moment they will be considering to lay down their arms.
Well, Mr. Collinsworth, another thing that the PKK have been asking for is unconditional amnesty for high-ranking rebels before surrendering its weapons. Would the government ever allow that to happen?
Again, this is going to be a decision that the government's going to take. The Turkish government is going to be a long and drawn-out process, and the hardcore on both sides of this conflict is going to be very difficult to appeal to them in this process. However, I think through this dialogue, the outcome that we should be looking towards is to getting the moderates to speak up, winning over those who are on the fence, and getting them to support this initiative towards rapprochement.
Mr. Ocalan, how should the government reach out to the PKK fighters in the mountains and convince them to lay down their arms? Because really, if the PKK was to completely renounce violence, well then they really wouldn't have much to bargain with, would they?
Well, I mean, that's the whole point. If PKK is, as it claims, really an organization that was set up to defend the rights of the Kurdish people in Turkey, then when these democratic demands are met by the Turkish government and by the Turkish society in general, then there will be no ground or justification for the PKK to exist in the first place. And this is what exactly the government is trying to say. That is, we will give you all these democratic rights, all these cultural rights, etc., obstacles, before the use of Kurdish language and other issues. Then there will be no ground for fighting. And at that point, it's up to the PKK to decide whether they will remain as a purely terrorist organization that is just doing terrorism in the name of terrorism, or really working towards the betterment of the condition of the Kurdish people. And there seems to be at least a strong political will on the part of the government to move ahead with this package of democratization this time, so that these legitimate demands are met by the people. And then there will be economic, social, and even psychological benefits to the people living in the region and to the entire society.
Well, let's just put all this into some context for you now, because for centuries the ethnic Kurds of southeastern Turkey have been fighting for recognition. Kurdish populated areas span across the borders of several countries, including Iraq, which has an autonomous Kurdish region. But in Turkey, the word Kurd is still taboo, as Anita McNaught now reports.
Erbil in Iraq's Kurdish autonomous region, and a gathering of Kurdish and Turkish intellectuals discussing semantics. Turkey calls the region northern Iraq. Kurds ask, why not use the word Kurdistan? Turkish journalist Cengiz Candar's long challenged his own country on the K word.
Language and identity are inseparable. So when you get into language, then you get into linguistics. And even very simple words may have very strong political connotations.
The words Kurd, Kurdistan have been taboo concepts, and the phrase Kurdistan has been used to perpetuate a fear that Kurds wanted to divide this country.
Erin Keskin, controversial and admired in Turkey, has been jailed and banned from practicing law for saying Kurdistan in public.
Because some do not want this issue to be resolved, the concept is criminalised and discussion on the issue is blocked.
There's a board game called Taboo. Players have to guess a mystery word that the card holder is not allowed to say. Turkish government policy has for decades been to deny the existence of a separate Kurdish identity in Turkey.
Kurdish language and culture were not to be used in public. The 3 letters of the Kurdish alphabet, which Turkey does not have, are illegal. But on a groundbreaking visit to Kurdish northern Iraq in March, Turkish President Abdullah Gül was prepared to break the taboo. Journalists say he used the K word.
I was on that trip. I will never forget it. President Gül thought it was time to test the waters and therefore used the expression just the once.
But using the word Kurdistan at home to refer to Turkey's southeast landed Erin Keskin in court again this year, and she's fighting a 10-month jail sentence from yet another court for saying much the same thing.
There's been enough hatred around this issue to make people want to kill you. It's a tragedy, really.
This problem, as long as it goes on, is crippling my country. We have to break the taboos in order to move forward and reconcile.
So while Kurdistan remains a taboo word for many Turks, the government's promised significant progress on Kurdish freedoms this year. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera in Istanbul, Turkey.
So clearly some serious obstacles to reconciliation between the Turkish government and the PKK. Alan Collinsworth, is the government taking a risk in trying to resolve this issue?
I don't think so. This issue has been very costly to Turkey over the last several decades. In human life terms, 35,000 lives. In economic terms, tens of billions of dollars. And steps towards addressing this issue will have a positive long-term result. And the ruling government's efforts to achieve this should be applauded by all.
Ibrahim Kalin, does Prime Minister Erdogan risk being called a hypocrite? Is his credibility on the line here by speaking to the DTP party leader Ahmed Turk? Because he has said many times in the past that he would not talk to the DTP unless they publicly announce that the PKK is a terrorist organization.
Well, he said it in the past, and he took this brave step, I believe, to restart the process of reconciliation between DTP, which represents a good part of the Kurdish voters in Turkey, and his party. He spoke to Ahmed Turk as the chairman of his party, but everybody kind of got the message there that, in fact, he was also the prime minister of Turkey. More importantly, there is this kind of growing consensus on doing more to solve this problem. I mean, you look at, for example, some of the recent decisions by the National Security Council, some of the statements coming from the Turkish Chief of Staff, İlker Başbuğ, other prominent political leaders, Speaker of the Parliament, other parliamentarians. I mean, as far as the Turkish state is concerned, there is actually a lot of change happening on this side. Some commentators in Turkey, including some that we watched on your program, they act as if none of these things are happening. In fact, you cannot miss the major changes that are happening as far as the state's perception and perspective on some of these issues are concerned. So one has to capitalize on some of the goodwill and the positive atmosphere that we have in Turkey about this. And if Turkey can pull it off this time, it will be a tremendous benefit to Turkey. And I think Erdogan is prepared to take whatever risk it involves. But I don't see it as a major risk for Erdogan, because his nationalist credentials and as a leader of the entire Turkish population population, including the Kurds, are never questioned in Turkey.
Sure. So you're saying that the political will is there. It's enough to get the process of dialogue, of engagement with the PKK off the ground. But Alan Collinsworth, how far is Ankara willing to go in this process? Will they go as far as protecting Kurdish identity in the constitution, having it integrated into the legal system?
There are certainly going to be red lines that have been drawn, and they're already been drawn by the opposition group. And again, this is going to be a lengthy process where all sides, all parties to this conflict are going to have to come to terms of how to carve out an ethnic Kurdish identity, but within the context of Turkish nationhood.
Ibrahim Dogus, Turkey has bombed and shelled PKK areas in northern Iraq before, using intelligence provided by Washington. Despite the process that we're seeing now, is the military option still on the table, do you think?
I think, yes, the military option is still on the table, and Turkey has recently again bombarded, not with the jet fighters, but with other means of military. They have been bombing the Iraqi Kurdish region in order to catch up with the guerrilla fighters. The guerrilla fighters have made a statement quite recently stating that if the Turkish state is seriously interested in making a peace, making a deal with the Kurdish people, then they are ready to disarm. Unless, if they are not willing to do that, if the discussions around peace and dialogue, if they're just a tactical way of, pushing the guerrillas to dissolve, and then if a military action is going to come back from the Turkish side, then they will fight again. The people in Turkey, the Kurdish people, have been waiting for a peaceful solution for so many years. And now they all believe that this is the best time to achieve that. But again, although Prime Minister, President, and many other key people in Turkish politics have been calling on for a reconciliation and so on, but we have not really seen anything in practice. We have seen Prime Minister meeting DTP leader Turk. We have seen Prime Minister saying good things on TVs and so on. But we have seen this in 2005. Whatever Prime Minister says now is a repeat of his comments he made at the public rally in Diyarbakir, December 2005. So it's not something new that we are hearing from the government, but we are just hearing what's already been said. We do see some basic steps being taken by the state, such as providing a Kurdish TV by the state, and also talking about renaming Kurdish villages in Kurdish language and lifting the ban on use of Kurdish and so on. But you don't see that happening yet. Some steps could be taken quite quickly. Some will take time. Certainly, nothing will happen overnight. But there are some good
it's interesting. Let's just talk about the timing of this initiative. Alan Collinsworth, this comes at a time when senior officials from Turkey, Iraq and the US are meeting in Ankara to discuss closer cooperation against PKK fighters who attack Turkey from bases in Iraq. Could that have something to do with this?
I think it does, and but it's a combination of some domestic issues as well as some developments regionally. Certainly, the pullout of American troops in Iraq has brought on and will bring a power vacuum regionally. The sum of all fears internationally is that Iraq erupts into greater conflict than it is now, and the trend we're seeing now is greater conflict between the Kurds and the Arab Iraqis. Turkey can play a positive role here in assisting this conflict and mitigating some of the current threats there. Turkey has played a positive role regionally vis-a-vis its negotiations between Syria and Israel, Palestine, and also Pakistan and Afghanistan. If Turkey is going to continue to play that role as a peace broker regionally, it needs to gain credibility by addressing its in-house issues with the Kurdish issue we're discussing today.
Ibrahim Kalin, there are some pro-Kurdish figures who are skeptical about this plan. Certainly Mr. Dogus has expressed some of those sentiments in this show. But let me give the example of Selahattin Demirtas, a Kurdish figure who has said that if the government wanted a durable and permanent solution to the Kurdish question, that it had to work with the Kurds and Ocalan. He says that any initiative which takes place without consultation with the Kurds will not be accepted by the public. Is it time that the Turkish government opens direct negotiations with Abdullah Ocalan himself?
Well, no, not with Abdullah Öcalan, obviously. I mean, his position is very clear. He is in prison. He's been sentenced to prison in life. But there are others the government has been talking to, including the DTP leaders and other important figures in the region. I mean, DTP obviously is an important part of the Kurdish politics in Turkey, but no one can claim that DTP is the only political representative of the Kurdish people in Turkey. Remember, even in the last elections where the current government lost some points, still got about almost half of the Kurdish voters' support in the region and in the country overall. So the government is doing that, that is talking to the legitimate counterparts. DTP has been saying that if Öcalan is willing to take a role in this and contribute to the process positively, that's fine. But government is not going to sit around the same table with Öcalan and discuss the details of disarmament. That's not going to happen, obviously, for public, political, and other reasons. But as you can see, as I said, some people are acting as if the government or the official line has not changed at all over the last few years. In fact, has changed dramatically. You look at some of the statements and some of the steps taken on the ground.
Well, let me just,
like as Mr.
sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Ocalan, but let me just put that point that you make to Ibrahim Dogus. Would some sort of agreement, some sort of understanding between the PKK and the government that excludes PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan be acceptable to the Kurdish people, or is an agreement even possible without Öcalan's participation?
I mean, I agree with some of what's been said by Mr. Ocalan. Yes, there has been significant changes in government policy since 30 years. That is due to a struggle of Kurdish people. They have been fighting for this. They have been struggling for this campaign. But it is, I mean, Mr. Ocalan, I guess, will agree that Mr. Öcalan himself was an initiator of a peaceful reconciliation to Kurdish question. He himself, in 1999, asked his guerrilla group to withdraw from Turkish soil. So they have all withdrawn, went back into Iraqi Kurdistan to Kandil Mountains. They've stayed there for 5-6 years, just because they were waiting for the Turkish state to come up with a compromised solution to Kurdish question. This didn't happen, and the conflict re-emerged in 2004. And still, as Turkish media clearly puts, Öcalan is still the crucial sort of figurehead amongst the Kurdish population. Yes, DTP is the sole representative of Kurdish people in Turkey. Yes, DTP leader Ahmet Türk is the most influential politician in Turkey, in whole of Turkey amongst the Kurdish people. But the word of Öcalan is still very crucial if there is ever going to be a solution, because he is the only one who can be strongly influential over the PKK fighters and PKK members in Turkey and in Iraqi Kurdistan too.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us in Ankara, Ibrahim Ocalan, in Istanbul, Alan Collinsworth, and in London, Ibrahim Dogus. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.